Before this story begins, subscribe right now, because tonight's story will show you that true royalty is not measured by crowns, but by the sacrifices made when no one is watching. The Alpha King searched for his missing Luna through storms, mountains, and endless darkness, believing he might never see her again. But when he finally found her, she wasn't alone. Lying exhausted inside a hidden cave were 12 helpless wolf pups she had kept alive through the night, while risking her own life to save theirs. If you love emotional werewolf romances, Alpha Kings, powerful Lunas, heroic sacrifices, hidden conspiracies, and heart-stopping reunions, hit subscribe now, because what the Alpha King discovers beside those 12 pups will change the fate of the entire kingdom forever. And the truth behind her disappearance is far more dangerous than anyone imagined. The scent of copper, ozone, and freezing rain sliced through the dense canopy of the Whispering Woods, but it was the sudden, jagged snapping of a spiritual bond that brought Alpha King Dominic Torrance to his knees. The mud beneath his armored boots tore away as his claws dug into the earth, his chest heaving against a suffocating weight. Across the kingdom, the gossamer thread that tethered his soul to his missing queen, his Elena, had just frayed to a single bleeding fiber. She was dying. Not tomorrow. Not in an hour. No. Before we plunge into the heart of this storm to uncover the dark truth of what broke that bond, hello and welcome to the channel, my beautiful pack. I am so incredibly grateful to have you here with us today. Wherever you are tuning in from around the world, whether you are listening from a quiet room under a rainy sky or during a long drive into the night, please drop your city or country in the comments below. I read every single one of them. How are you holding up today? If you haven't joined our family yet, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your incredible support is the lifeblood of these stories, and it ensures you will never miss a single moment of the journeys we take together. Now close your eyes, breathe in the scent of the pine and the coming storm, and let's find out what lies in the dark. The rain did not merely fall. It assaulted the ancient timberland, drowning out the tracking senses of the elite royal guards who struggled to keep pace behind their sovereign. For 5 agonizing days, the pack had whispered that Elena Vance was gone, hunted down and torn apart by the rogue factions that harassed the northern borders. The High Council had already begun drafting the mourning edicts, urging the king to accept the cold reality that no one, not even a woman carrying the sacred lineage of the High Wolves, could survive an ambush by a dozen alpha-level assassins. But Dominic refused to mourn. He refused to let the political hyenas crown a ghost. His wolf, a towering silver-furred beast of pure primal fury, thrashed beneath his skin, roaring against the silence of the bond. "Sire, the tracks vanish into the Black Crag," yelled Commander Bruce Lithgow, his voice barely cutting through the howling gale. "The terrain is unstable. If we enter the Forbidden Canyons during a flash flood, the mudslides will bury the entire unit." Dominic didn't look back. His eyes, usually a piercing, calculated amber, had completely bled into a terrifying, luminous obsidian. "Then stay behind," he growled, the alpha command vibrating through the trees, forcing his hardened guards to instinctively bow their heads. "I am not returning without my wife." He threw himself forward, shifting mid-stride. A massive silver-furred lichen tore through the underbrush, his paws tearing up rocks and moss as he scrambled up the treacherous, crumbling face of the Forbidden Mountain. The air grew thinner, freezing the rain into jagged needles of ice that pelted his muzzle. The spiritual pull was faint, a pathetic dying heartbeat echoing in the back of his mind, drawing him toward a narrow, concealed fissure in the jagged rock face, a cave hidden behind a frozen waterfall. Slamming his massive weight through the sheet of ice, Dominic crashed into the cavern floor, shifting back into his human form as he skidded across the jagged stone. The air inside smelled of old blood, damp fur, and the suffocating stench of hypothermia. At the far end of the cave, illuminated by the absolute last dying orange embers of a desperate fire, lay Elena. Dominic's breath hitched, a choked sound escaping his throat. She was on her side, her silk tunic shredded into bloodied rags, her beautiful pale skin mapped with deep, infected claw wounds from the rogue ambush. She looked impossibly fragile, her breathing so shallow it barely stirred the dust on the floor. But as Dominic took a frantic step forward, his foot clicked against a loose stone. Instantly, a low, fierce, completely feral growl echoed from the shadows of Elena's body. It wasn't her voice. Through the dim light, Dominic saw the shifting of fur. nestled tightly against her chest, tucked under the curve of her stomach, sheltered beneath her long blood-matted hair, and wrapped in the remaining scraps of her cloak were 12 tiny, shivering wolf pups. They were orphans of the northern packs that had been massacred days prior, left to freeze to death in the wilderness. But they hadn't frozen. Because Elena had kept them alive. Her arms, raw and frostbitten, were locked around them in an unbreakable maternal vice. Her skin was ice-cold because she had stripped her own layers to cover them. The shallow indentation in the earth showed she hadn't shifted into her wolf form to protect herself. Doing so would have crushed the fragile newborns. Instead, she had endured the freezing night as a vulnerable human, using her own life force, her own body heat, to anchor 12 orphaned lives to this earth while hers slipped away. "Elena," Dominic whispered, his voice cracking as he fell to his knees beside her, his hands trembling violently, terrified that touching her might break what little hold she had on life. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy and pale. As she looked at him, her eyes didn't hold the relief of a rescued queen. They held a fierce, desperate plea. With the absolute last ounce of her strength, she didn't reach for him. She lifted a trembling, frost-bitten hand and placed it protectively over the smallest, shivering white pup resting against her heart. Her voice was nothing more than a ghost of air against the roar of the cave's entrance. "Keep them safe. They are the key." Before Dominic could press his lips to her forehead, before he could flood their bond with his own life force, Elena's hand fell limp against the cold stone. The final, microscopic spark of their bond went completely, terrifyingly dark. What did Elena discover in those woods before she was hunted? And who within the royal court stood to gain from making sure she and these 12 mysterious pups never made it back alive? The silence that followed the collapse of the bond was louder than the roaring storm outside. Dominic did not roar. He did not cry out. True absolute power does not scream. It suffocates. The air inside the cavern grew instantly heavy, the atmospheric pressure dropping so sharply that the 12 tiny pups buried in Elena's frozen clothes began to whimper, sensing the terrifying aura of a predatory god bleeding from the Alpha King. "Sire." Commander Bruce crashed through the ice curtain, his sword drawn, his lungs burning. He stopped dead. The sight before him froze the blood in his veins. The Silver King was on his knees, his massive hands hovering millimeters above his queen's chest, tracing the horrific jagged lacerations that marred her porcelain skin. Dominic's eyes were no longer amber, nor were they merely black. They were empty, bottomless pits of pure, concentrated vengeance. "Call the royal physicians," Dominic ordered. His voice was a low vibrational frequency that made the loose gravel on the cave floor rattle. "Tell them if she does not breathe by the time the moon hits its crest, the medical lineage of this kingdom ends tonight." "But sire, the storm." "Now Bruce." As the commander scrambled back into the tempest, Dominic gently, with the precision of a man handling spun glass, gathered Elena into his arms. The moment his skin touched hers, a brutal shockwave of grief slammed into his chest. He was so cold. Elena, who used to wake him by pressing her sun-warmed palms against his cheeks, who possessed a warmth that could thaw the harshest winters of the northern steppes, felt like a statue carved from river ice. As he lifted her, a chorus of high-pitched, terrified yips broke out. The 12 pups, suddenly deprived of the maternal furnace that had kept them alive for 5 days, began to scatter across the stone floor. They were tiny, blind, and uncoordinated, their legs buckling under their weight. Yet, remarkably, they did not run away from Dominic. They crawled toward him, instinctively recognizing the scent of the man their protector loved. Dominic looked down at them, his jaw tightening. He was a king built for war, trained to eliminate threats, not cradle orphans. His deepest fear had always been that his primal, destructive nature would eventually destroy the fragile, beautiful things he was meant to protect. It was why he had resisted the mate bond with Elena for months when they were first introduced by the High Council. She was a daughter of the scholars, a woman of books, diplomacy, and quiet grace, while he was a monster born from battlefield bloodlines. Yet looking at her now, he realized how profoundly he had misjudged her. She wasn't fragile. She had endured an assassination attempt, crawled miles through a freezing wilderness, and sacrificed her own body heat to keep 12 defenseless lives from extinguishing. She was a fiercer warrior than any Leakin in his vanguard. "You stubborn, beautiful fool," Dominic murmured, his chest aching as he pulled her tighter against his chest, trying to force his own skyrocketing body heat into her failing organs. With a low growl, he gathered the remaining scraps of Elena's cloak with his one free hand, scooping up all 12 pups. They swarmed into the crook of his massive arm, burrowing beneath his leather tunic, seeking his heat. He closed his eyes, opening his mind to the pack link, searching for the one person he could trust with the physical reality of what had happened. Genevieve, he projected, his mental voice cracking the psychic barriers of the pack's lead physician, who was miles away at the Vanguard campsite. Prepare the silver blood serum. She is code black. And Genevieve, there are children. 12 of them. Prepare the nursery units. A sharp gasp echoed through the mind link. Children, sire? From the northern rogue territory? That's impossible. That entire sector was cleansed by the border patrols last Tuesday. Dominic's mind halted. Cleansed? The official reports he had received from High Chancellor Raymond Sterling stated that the northern sector was experiencing minor civil unrest, not a total liquidation. Why had the Chancellor lied? And how did these 12 pups manage to survive an operation that was supposed to be a simple patrol? He looked down at the smallest pup, the white one Elena had desperately pointed to before she lost consciousness. The pup opened its eyes for the first time. They weren't the standard milky blue of a newborn wolf. They were a piercing, unmistakable royal violet. Dominic's breath caught. Royal violet was a genetic marker that had been extinct for 3 centuries, a trait belonging exclusively to the ancient lunar lineage, the original rulers of the entire Lecan race, before the Great Fracture divided the kingdom into the current modern packs. If this pup carried the lunar bloodline, it meant these 12 orphans weren't random refugees. They were the legitimate heirs to a throne that predated Dominic's own. And if someone in the royal court knew they existed, it explained why the northern sector had been cleansed, and why Elena had been hunted the moment she went missing near that border. You didn't just save a pack of orphans, did you, my love? Dominic whispered into Elena's cold hair, his heart hammering against his ribs. You saved a revolution. The sound of rushing footsteps signaled Bruce's return with a transport litter, accompanied by a small, heavily armed detachment. Among them was Lady Catherine Rose, Elena's closest childhood friend and a high-ranking diplomat of the court. Catherine took one look at Elena's lifeless form and let out a strangled sob, dropping to her knees. What did they do to her? Catherine whispered, her hands shaking as she reached out, before noticing the swarm of tiny heads poking out from Dominic's tunic. Her eyes widened in absolute shock. Are those... Dominic, where did she find them? We don't speak of them here, Dominic commanded, his voice cutting through Catherine's panic. He carefully transferred Elena to the insulated litter, ensuring the pups stayed nestled beside her, using the collective heat of the medical blankets to maintain their warmth. Bruce, clear the perimeter. No one enters the castle through the main gates. We use the subterranean tunnels under the eastern keep. If a single word about these pups leaves this unit, I will consider it high treason. As the soldiers lifted the litter and began the treacherous trek down the mountain, Dominic walked closely beside Elena, his hand locked around hers. He kept his fingers pressed against her wrist, counting the erratic, dangerously slow beats of her pulse. The physical storm around them was fading, but the political storm awaiting them inside the stone walls of the capital was about to turn into a bloodbath. Someone inside his inner circle had orchestrated the death of an entire bloodline, and when that failed, they had tried to murder his queen to bury the evidence. Dominic looked toward the distant, glowing spires of the royal palace visible through the breaking clouds. He had spent his entire life learning how to rule a kingdom with law and structure. But to protect his wife and the 12 secrets she had kept alive through the freezing dark, he would have to remember how to be a monster. Are you ready to see what happens when the Alpha King brings his broken queen back into a court filled with vipers? Drop a comment below with your theories on who betrayed the crown. And if you haven't yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next act. The heavy, iron-reinforced oak doors of the subterranean medical bay slammed shut, cutting off the echoing dripping of the underground tunnels. The air here was sterile, thick with the pungent, metallic scent of antiseptic and silver blood serum. Dominic stood like an immovable statue against the stone wall, his arms tightly crossed over his chest. His tunic was still stained with Elena's blood and the damp, earthy musk of the 12 pups, who had been hastily moved to a concealed containment cradle in the corner of the room. Her vitals are stabilizing, sire, But she is hovering on a razor's edge, Dr. Genevieve ordered, her fingers flying across medical monitors while assistant medics adjusted the glowing 4 lines feeding into Elena's arms. The rogue wolves use silver-tipped claws. The toxin is circulating near her heart. If she hadn't possessed an extraordinarily resilient spirit, she would have succumbed to the poison within the first 12 hours. What kept her alive wasn't biology. It was pure, unadulterated willpower. Dominic's eyes drifted toward the cradle. The 12 pups were huddled together in a singular, breathing mass of fur, exhausted but safe. The smallest white pup with the violet eyes poked its head out, letting out a soft, inquisitive whimper that vibrated in Dominic's chest. Suddenly the heavy doors clicked open. High Chancellor Raymond Sterling stepped into the room, his silk robes rustling against the stone floor. His face was a mask of pristine, manufactured grief, but Dominic did not miss the microscopic twitch in the elder wolf's jaw when his eyes swept across the room and landed, not on Elena, but on the containment cradle. "Your Majesty," Raymond said, bowing low, his voice dripping with smooth, practiced reverence. The entire palace breathes a sigh of relief at the news of the Luna's recovery. It is a miracle from the ancestors themselves. However, rumors are already spreading through the lower barracks about unusual cargo brought back from the Forbidden Lands. Dominic didn't move a muscle. "Rumors are the currency of cowards, Chancellor. I suggest you don't trade in them." Raymond offered a tight, patronizing smile, stepping closer to the cradle. "Of course, sire. But as Chancellor I must advise caution. The northern borders are rife with plague and rogue crossbreeds. These creatures are what the scouts suggest. They represent a biological and political hazard to the capital. Protocol dictates they be quarantined outside the walls immediately. Or more mercifully put down." The temperature in the room plummeted. Dominic stepped forward, his massive frame completely eclipsing the Chancellor. The sheer weight of his alpha aura forced Raymond's knees to buckle slightly, his polite facade cracking to reveal a flash of raw terror. "Touch them, Raymond, and I will feed your lineage to the border crows," Dominic whispered, his voice dangerously calm. "They stay here, under my direct supervision." Before Raymond could recover his composure, the medical monitors began to beep erratically. "Sire. She's waking up," Genevieve called out, her voice tense. Dominic bypassed the Chancellor entirely, rushing to Elena's bedside. Her eyelids flickered, straining against the harsh light of the medical bay. Her lips were parched, cracked and bleeding. As her eyes fully opened, the deep, soulful hazel of her irises clashed with a sudden, frantic panic. She didn't look at Dominic. Her head whipped wildly toward the corner of the room. "Pie babies," she gasped, her voice a ragged, painful scrape. She threw her legs over the edge of the medical bed, tearing the 4 lines straight from her skin. Blood splattered onto the white tiles. "Where are they? Dominic. They're going to kill them." "Elena, stop. You're bleeding." Dominic caught her by the shoulders, gently but firmly pinning her against his chest. "They're right here. They are safe. Look at me, look into my eyes. I have them. They are alive." The moment her eyes locked onto his, the chaotic panic in her sense softened, replaced by a devastating raw vulnerability. She gripped the fabric of his shirt with both hands, burying her face into his neck, her entire body shaking with violent, silent sobs. "They murdered the whole village, Dominic," she wept, her voice muffled against his skin. "It wasn't a rogue attack. It was our own vanguard banners. I saw the crest. They were executing the newborns. I managed to grab the royal litter and run, but someone leaked my escape route to the border trackers. They knew exactly where I would cross the river." Dominic's heart turned to solid ice. Our own banners. The betrayal didn't just sit in the High Council. It had infected his army. "Who gave the order, Elena?" Dominic demanded softly, his hands cupping her face, forcing her to look at him. "Give me a name." Before she could speak, the smallest white pup broke away from the cradle, scrambling across the cold floor with surprising speed. It reached the bed, let out a sharp yip and scrambled up Dominic's boot, using its tiny claws to scale his trousers until it tumbled onto the mattress, burying its snout directly into Elena's palm. Elena's expression transformed from terror to a fierce, protective warmth. She cradled the pup against her chest. "It's not just about a name, Dominic. Look at her. Look at her eyes." As if on cue, the white pup looked up, its striking violet eyes flashing in the dim light. Raymond, who had been quietly retreating toward the exit, froze. His eyes widened to the size of saucers, the color completely draining from his face. The lunar lineage. The true bloodline still breathes. In that split second of realization, Raymond didn't offer an excuse. He didn't offer a defense. Instead, his hand slipped into his sleeve, pulling out a small silver whistle, a high-frequency distress beacon used only by the inner circle of the rebel faction known as the Eclipse Syndicate. He blew into it, a silent sound wave vibrating through the stone walls. "Guards!" Dominic roared, shifting his arm into a razor-sharp claw, pinning Raymond against the wall by his throat before the Chancellor could even take a step toward the door. "Secure the perimeter." But it was too late. The heavy iron doors didn't open to reveal Dominic's loyal guards. Instead, for heavily armored vanguard soldiers, their faces hidden behind dark steel visors, stepped into the room. Their weapons weren't drawn to protect the king. They were raised, pointed directly at the bed where Elena and the 12 pups lay vulnerable. The coup wasn't coming. It was already inside the room. Are you ready to see how Dominic fights to protect his mate and the 12 heirs against his own elite soldiers? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe to see the next part of this high-stakes battle. The air in the subterranean medical bay shattered into a million pieces of tension. The 4 vanguard soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, their heavy steel boots clicking against the bloody tile floor, blocking the only exit. The polished silver of their long-bladed pikes gleamed under the harsh artificial lighting, reflecting the murderous intent hidden behind their dark visors. Dominic did not loosen his grip on Chancellor Raymond's throat. His claws dug a fraction deeper into the elder wolf's flesh, drawing beads of dark, sluggish blood. "You dare bring treason into my wife's sickroom, Raymond?" the king growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "You think 4 men are enough to walk out of here alive?" "They aren't here to kill you, your majesty," Raymond gasped out, a sickening, arrogant sneer contorting his blood-streaked face. "They are here to correct a historical error. The lunar bloodline belongs in the ash heap of history. Kill the pups and ensure the Luna stays silent." The soldier on the far left lunged forward, his silver pike whistling through the air as it aimed directly for the containment cradle where the 11 other pups were huddled. "Dominic, no!" Elena screamed. Despite the agonizing burn of the silver toxin in her veins, she threw her body across the bed, using her own torso as a shield over the small white pup, her hazel eyes blazing with a fierce maternal fury that defied her physical limitations. Dominic didn't hesitate. With a roar of pure, unadulterated primal rage, he hurled Raymond's heavy body directly into the advancing soldier. The two collided with a sickening crunch of bone and steel, crashing into the medical monitors in a shower of sparks and shattered glass. In the same fluid motion, Dominic shifted partially, his arms expanding into massive, silver-furred weapons topped with razor-sharp claws. He intercepted the second soldier's pike with his bare hand, the silver edge burning his palm, but he ignored the searing pain. With a brutal twist, he snapped the reinforced steel shaft in half, driving the broken, jagged end directly into the soldier's shoulder plating. The man collapsed, groaning as blood pooled around his armor. The remaining 2 traitors froze, their discipline momentarily breaking as they stared at the raw, unchecked savagery of their alpha king. Dominic stood between them and the medical bed, his chest heaving, his amber eyes completely swallowed by black wolf fire. Smoke drifted from his burned palm as his rapid healing factor fought against the silver poisoning. "Move," Dominic whispered to Dr. Genevieve, who was cowering behind a steel desk, holding a heavy medical tray. "Take the cradle. Get them to the eastern vault. Now." Before the soldiers could recover, Genevieve sprinted forward, scooping up the containment cradle with a burst of adrenaline. Elena, clutching the violet-eyed pup tightly against her chest, dragged herself off the bed, her legs trembling violently as she stood beside her husband. She picked up a discarded silver dagger from a tray, her posture rigid and defiant despite the cold sweat pouring down her face. "I am not leaving you, Dominic," she breathed, her scent filled with terror but overriding it with absolute unwavering devotion. "We fight together. We always have." The 2 soldiers lunged simultaneously. Dominic caught one by the throat, driving him hard into the stone pillar, while Elena, using the agility of her scholar training, sidestepped the other's clumsy thrust. She brought the hilt of her dagger down heavily against the back of the soldier's helmet, dazing him long enough for Dominic to spin around and deliver a devastating kick that sent the man crashing through the heavy wooden medicine cabinets. Clear! Dominic roared, grabbing Elena by the waist and pulling her into the corridor just as the alarms throughout the subterranean keep began to wail in high-pitched, deafening bursts. The underground halls were chaos. The red emergency lights pulsed against the damp stone walls, casting long, demonic shadows. The sound of distant gunfire and clashing steel echoed from the upper barracks. The coup wasn't localized to the medical bay. A massive faction of the vanguard had turned on the loyalists. Dominic ran, shielding Elena's fragile body with his massive frame as they navigated the labyrinthine tunnels toward the eastern keep. Beside them, Bruce emerged from a side corridor, his uniform torn, his sword dripping with fresh blood. "Sire, the western gate has fallen," Bruce reported breathlessly, joining their frantic sprint. "The Eclipse Syndicate. They've infiltrated the lower ranks. Half the guard is wearing the black band. They are hunting for the Luna and the children. They've locked down the main armory." "Where is Lady Catherine?" Elena gasped, her breath catching as a sharp wave of pain from the silver toxin shot through her chest. She stumbled, her knees buckling, but Dominic caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. The small white pup tucked inside her shirt let out a tiny, frightened yip. "Lady Catherine is securing the High Council chambers with the remaining loyalists," Bruce replied, his eyes scanning the shadows behind them. "But we are running out of ground, sire. If they corner us in the eastern vault, we're trapped." Dominic's jaw set into a hard line. He could feel the desperate, chaotic energy of his pack through the mental link, confusion, betrayal, and fear ripping through his people. The kingdom he had spent a decade building into a beacon of stability was tearing itself apart at the seams, all because of a secret hidden in the eyes of a tiny, innocent wolf pup. They reached the heavy, reinforced vault doors of the eastern keep. Genevieve was already there, frantically punching the security runes into the stone panel. The 11 pups inside the cradle were crying now, their high-pitched wails echoing off the stone walls, a sound that tore at Elena's heart. "Open it, Genevieve," Dominic ordered, his ears twitching as the rhythmic heavy thud of marching boots began to echo from both ends of the corridor. They were being boxed in. "The system is jammed from the Master Console, sire. Someone is overriding my clearance from the High Council tower." Genevieve cried out, tears of frustration streaming down her cheeks. Elena pulled the small white pup from her shirt, looking deeply into its violet eyes. The pup stopped whimpering, staring back at her with an ancient, eerie intelligence that seemed completely out of place in a newborn. Suddenly, the pup reached out its tiny pink tongue and licked a drop of Elena's blood from her hand. A strange, soft hum vibrated through the air. The security runes on the vault door suddenly flickered from a hostile bright red to a soft, glowing violet. With a heavy, mechanical groan, the massive stone doors began to slide open on their own. Bruce stared in absolute disbelief. The ancient bloodlocks. They respond only to the lunar lineage. It's true. The myth is real. "Get inside. All of you," Dominic commanded, shoving Genevieve and the cradle through the opening. He turned to Bruce. "Stay with them. Guard them with your life." "Dominic, no." Elena grabbed his collar, her hazel eyes wide with a sudden, suffocating panic. "Don't leave me out here. Don't fight them alone." Dominic leaned down, pressing his lips firmly against hers in a fierce, passionate kiss that tasted of rain, copper, and desperation. He poured every ounce of his love, his strength, and his determination into their fractured bond, forcing a temporary warmth back into her cold skin. "I am not leaving you, my queen," he whispered against her lips, his amber eyes burning with absolute promise. "I am setting the trap. They want a war? I will give them a graveyard. Go. Keep the future alive." Before she could protest, he gently pushed her back into the vault. The massive stone doors slid shut with a deafening thud, locking the 12 pups and his beautiful Luna behind feet of impenetrable ancient rock. Dominic turned around to face the dark corridor. From the shadows, dozens of red-eyed rogue wolves and corrupted vanguard soldiers began to emerge, their weapons drawn, their teeth bared. He smiled, a dark, bloodthirsty expression that would have terrified a demon. He opened his arms wide, his claws fully extending, his silver fur rippling under his skin. The real fight for the Leaken Kingdom had just begun. The stone corridor outside the eastern vault became a meat grinder. Dominic did not wait for the corrupted vanguard soldiers to close the distance. With a devastating, ground-shaking roar that shattered the remaining light fixtures overhead, the Alpha King launched himself into the center of the traitorous horde. He was a blur of silver fury and unchecked savagery. His claws tore through reinforced steel breastplates as if they were wet parchment. A soldier lunged with a silver pike. Dominic caught the blade beneath his arm, spun on his heel and shattered the man's jaw with a backhand that sent him crashing into the stone wall. Blood splattered across the ancient runes of the corridor, painting the floor in a gruesome tapestry of betrayal. Yet for every 5 men Dominic broke, 10 more emerged from the crimson-lit shadows. These weren't just standard soldiers. They were highly trained executioners from the Eclipse Syndicate, their eyes glowing a volatile, unnatural crimson, the telltale sign of wolves injected with forbidden berserker serum. "Yield, your majesty," a voice cut through the chaos, cold and dripping with absolute certainty. Dominic ducked beneath a sweeping blade, grabbed the attacker by the ankle and slammed him into the floor before looking up. Standing at the end of the hall, flanked by a dozen crossbowmen, was High Chancellor Raymond Sterling. He had bandaged his neck where Dominic had torn it earlier, and in his right hand he held a glowing obsidian cylinder, a master control crystal for the palace's ancient defense matrix. "You are fighting for a ghost, Dominic," Raymond sneered, lifting the crystal. "The kingdom you think you are protecting has already evolved past you. The High Council has signed the decree. You are unfit to rule. Your obsession with a weak, broken Luna has blinded you to the true destiny of our race." Dominic stood amidst a pile of groaning, bleeding bodies, his chest heaving. Smoke rose from dozens of shallow silver cuts across his arms and torso, his healing factor burning through his energy reserves at a terrifying rate. He spat blood onto the floor, his obsidian eyes locked onto the Chancellor. "You think a piece of paper signed by old men makes you a king, Raymond?" Dominic growled, taking a heavy, deliberate step forward. The crossbowmen instantly notched their silver-tipped bolts, aiming directly at his heart. "You liquidated an entire northern sector to hide 12 children. You hunted my wife. Tell me why before I rip your spine through your throat." Raymond let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed hollowly down the corridor. 12 children? Is that what she told you? Is that what your precious Elena thinks she saved? The Chancellor stepped closer, the obsidian crystal casting long, distorted shadows across his face. "Those aren't just orphans, you foolish brute. They are the genetic harvest of the ancient lunar lineage, yes, but they weren't found by accident. They were created." Dominic's mind halted. The pack link in his head briefly went completely silent. "What did you say?" "The Great Fracture 300 years ago didn't destroy the lunar lineage," Raymond whispered, his eyes gleaming with a sickening, fanatical pride. "The High Council preserved the DNA. For 3 decades, in the hidden subterranean laboratories of the northern sector, we have been engineering the ultimate weapons. 12 pups, born from a single synthetically revived alpha strain. They aren't children, Dominic. They are biological keys designed to interface with the ancient weapons sleeping beneath this very palace. Weapons that can wipe out human civilization and establish Leaken supremacy forever." A suffocating realization slammed into Dominic's chest, heavier than any physical blow he had taken all night. Elena hadn't stumbled upon a tragic massacre. She had uncovered a horrific multi-decade Black Ops program run by his own government. "But we had a variable we didn't account for," Raymond continued, his sneer deepening. "Your lovely, sentimental queen. She was on a diplomatic tour of the northern libraries when she accidentally breached the facility's perimeter. He saw the infants. And instead of reporting it to you, she chose to commit high treason. She stole our weapons. She ran into the storm with them. She saved them from becoming monsters like you," Dominic roared, his voice cracking with an agonizing mixture of fury and deep protective grief for what his wife had endured alone in that freezing cave. "She delayed the inevitable," Raymond corrected coldly. He raised his hand, gesturing to the crossbowmen. "And now she will die with them. Kill him." Before the bolts could fly, a deafening explosion rocked the entire corridor. The heavy stone vault doors behind Dominic didn't just slide open. They shattered outward in a concussive wave of violet energy. The sheer force of the blast threw the crossbowmen off balance, their bolts firing wildly into the ceiling. Raymond staggered backward, shielding his eyes as a blinding, ethereal light poured from the breached vault. Through the smoke and dust, a figure emerged. It was Elena. She was no longer stumbling. She was no longer pale. The silver toxin that had been threatening her heart had been completely purged, her skin glowing with a faint, iridescent luminescence. Her hazel eyes had completely transformed into a brilliant, swirling violet, matching the exact shade of the ancient lunar lineage. Nestled in the crook of her left arm was the small white pup, its eyes glowing in perfect synchronization with hers. Behind her, Bruce and Genevieve stood with their weapons drawn, flanked by the other 11 pups who were no longer whimpering. They stood in a perfect military-style formation, their tiny ears pinned back, their eyes locked onto Raymond with a terrifying unified intelligence. "The blood bond," Genevieve whispered from the shadows, her voice trembling with awe. She didn't just save them. He bonded with them. She adopted their lineage into her own soul. Elena stepped forward, her voice no longer a fragile scrape, but a resonant, multi-layered command that made every traitorous wolf in the corridor instantly drop to their knees in involuntary submission. "You spoke of destiny, Raymond," Elena said, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, celestial light as she looked at the Chancellor. "But you forgot the first law of the ancestors. The lunar lineage cannot be owned. It cannot be weaponized by cowards who hide behind steel visors." She turned her gaze to Dominic, and through their broken, bleeding spiritual bond, a massive, overwhelming tidal wave of warmth, love, and absolute raw power flooded his system. His wounds healed instantly, the silver smoke dissipating as his amber eyes returned, brighter and more powerful than ever before. Their bond didn't just repair. It fused into something entirely new, a dual sovereign link that made them two halves of a singular, godlike entity. Dominic stood beside his wife, his hand locking into hers. The collective power radiating from the king, the queen, and the 12 ancient heirs was so intense that the stone walls began to crack, dust raining down like snow. "Raymond," Dominic said, his voice overlapping with the low growl of his wolf. "Your counsel is dismissed." The ethereal violet glow radiating from Elena's eyes did not bring peace. It brought a terrifying, volatile reckoning. For a single breathless second, the corrupted vanguard soldiers remained pinned to the bloody floor, their wolves whining in absolute instinctual terror beneath their skin. The combined aura of the Alpha King and the newly awakened Lunar Queen compressed the very oxygen in the corridor, turning it into a suffocating vacuum. But High Chancellor Raymond Sterling was a man who had traded his soul for this conspiracy decades ago. He was too far deep into the abyss to let a resurrected myth stop him. "Do not freeze, you spineless curs!" Raymond shrieked, his pristine facade completely disintegrating into an ugly veins-popping mask of desperation. He violently smashed the glowing obsidian master crystal against the stone floor. "She is a scholar, not a god. Kill the pups. Activate the purge protocol." As the crystal shattered, a deep, mechanical groan reverberated from the literal foundations of the palace. The ancient runes carved into the stone walls, which had just been glowing a gentle, protective violet, suddenly flashed a violent, corrosive crimson. A high-pitched metallic shriek filled the air as heavy, solid steel blast doors began to slam down from the ceiling every 10 feet throughout the corridor, systematically segmenting the space and cutting off all escape routes. "Dominic!" Elena cried out. But before Dominic could reach her, a massive steel barrier crashed down directly between them with the force of a falling meteor, burying itself 6 inches into the solid bedrock. The concussive blast threw Dominic backward, his boots skidding through the blood and debris. "Elena!" Dominic roared into their newly fused mind link, throwing his massive silver-furred shoulder directly into the steel door. The metal dented with a deafening screech, but it held. It was reinforced with dark silver ore, a rare material specifically mined to neutralize high-level alpha strength. "Elena, can you hear me?" A static-filled, agonizing wave of pain slammed into his brain through the link. "Dominic, the air, it's burning," her voice gasped out, fading rapidly. "The purge. They're venting the silver gas into this chamber. I can't leave the children." Through the thick, reinforced glass observation port of the blast door, Dominic watched in absolute, paralyzed horror as thick, billowing plumes of a heavy, glowing green vapor began to hiss from the ceiling vents into Elena's sealed section. It was aerosolized silver toxin. A biological weapon banned by international Leakin Treaty centuries ago. Inside the chamber, the 12 pups instantly collapsed to their sides, their tiny bodies seizing violently as they let out heartbreaking, choked wails. Elena dropped to her knees, her violet aura flickering wildly like a candle in a hurricane as she desperately pulled the small white pup into her chest, using her own clothes, her own failing breath, to filter the poison away from the newborn's lungs. No, 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 no. Dominic slammed his bare fists into the dark silver door over and over, his knuckles splitting open, exposing white bone before his hyper-accelerated healing factor could even react. The silver dust on the door was burning his flesh to ash, but he didn't feel it. The sheer, suffocating despair of watching his wife and the 12 innocent lives she had protected through the freezing wilderness die right in front of him, while he stood inches away powerless, was a torture that threatened to completely shatter his sanity. "It's over, Dominic." Raymond's voice echoed over the palace's internal audio system, cold, mechanical, and victorious. "The chamber is completely airtight. In less than 3 minutes, the lunar lineage will be permanently erased, and your precious queen will be nothing more than a memory. Yield the throne, or I will vent the gas into the entire keep." Dominic stopped slamming the door. He stood perfectly still in the dim red-lit corridor, his head bowed, his long silver hair falling forward to shadow his face. The silence stretching through his pack link was absolute. Every loyalist wolf in the palace could feel the sheer, crushing weight of their king's despair. It felt like the death of hope itself. Suddenly, from the far end of the darkened hallway behind Dominic, a rhythmic, heavy clicking of boots approached. Dominic didn't look up, his claws dripping blood onto the stone floor as his wolf thrashed in the cage of his mind, screaming for a slaughter. "I told you, Dominic," a voice sighed, a voice that made Dominic's entire world tilt on its axis. He slowly turned his head. Stepping out from the shadows of the cross corridor, flanked by a fresh platoon of dark-badged syndicate executioners, was Commander Bruce Lithgow. Bruce wasn't wearing his Royal Vanguard crest anymore. Pinned to his collar was the silver and black crescent moon of the Eclipse Syndicate. And in his left hand, dragging heavily against the floor, was the blood-soaked, unconscious body of Lady Catherine Rose. "Bruce," Dominic whispered, his voice a dead, hollow sound. "You. The king is a warrior, but a warrior cannot navigate the century of humans," Bruce said, his face completely devoid of remorse as he tossed Catherine's limp body to the floor like a sack of garbage. "Raymond promised us a future where wolves don't have to hide in the forests anymore. We needed the lunar weapons to break the human world. I'm sorry, sire. But you are a relic of a peaceful era we can no longer afford." Through the glass port behind him, Dominic heard a muffled, weak thud. He whipped around. Elena had crawled her way to the glass. Her face was pale, blood trickling from her nose and ears as the silver gas completely overwhelmed her system. She pressed her trembling palm against the glass, right over where Dominic's hand rested on the other side. Her violet eyes were dimming, turning back into a dull, fading hazel. She didn't look at Bruce. She didn't look at the soldiers. She looked only at Dominic, her gaze holding a devastating final goodbye. "I love you," her voice whispered one last time in his mind, a faint, dying ember. "Protect the future." Her eyes closed and her body went completely limp, slumping against the base of the steel door. Beside her, the 12 pups stopped moving, their tiny chests no longer rising. Dominic stood alone in the dark corridor, surrounded by traitors, his wife dead behind a wall of steel, his kingdom stolen from beneath his feet, and his soul ripped completely in half. The darkness didn't just surround him, it swallowed him whole. The line between a broken man and a god of ruin is a single breath. As Elena's hand slid down the blood-smeared glass of the airtight chamber, the silence inside Dominic's soul expanded until it swallowed the entire universe. The red emergency lights pulsed against his face, casting him in the jagged, rhythmic colors of an execution. Before him stood Bruce, backed by a dozen black-badged executioners. Behind him, his wife and 12 innocent children lay motionless in a cloud of emerald poison. "Take the crown, Bruce," Raymond's voice mechanicalized through the overhead speakers, smug and entirely certain of its victory. "The king is dead in every way that matters. Put him out of his misery." Bruce stepped forward, his heavy claymore raised high, the silver edge gleaming with cold finality. "Goodbye, Dominic. You were a good master. But you were a terrible god. The blade descended, cutting through the air with a lethal whistling shriek. But it never hit the ground. With a sound like a cracking glacier, Dominic's left hand shot upward, his bare, skinless fingers catching the razor-sharp silver blade by its very edge. The silver sizzled, white smoke hissing into the air as the metal bit deep into his palm. But Dominic didn't flinch. He didn't blink. His head slowly rose, his silver hair parting to reveal eyes that were no longer amber, nor black, nor violet. They were a burning, blinding, radioactive gold, the ancient mythical mark of the Fenrir sovereign, an evolutionary state that only occurs when an alpha's mate bond is violently severed while his physical body is still breathing. You think you understand the future, Bruce? Dominic whispered. The sheer vibrational force of his voice did not travel through the air. It traveled through the bedrock. The stones beneath Bruce's boots shattered into dust. You think you can build a kingdom on the blood of children? With a brutal, effortless twist of his wrist, Dominic snapped the heavy claymore into 3 jagged pieces of steel. Before Bruce could even register the shock, Dominic's right fist buried itself into the center of the commander's reinforced chest plating. The steel imploded inward with a concussive boom, throwing Bruce 50 feet down the corridor, his body smashing through 2 separate steel blast doors before collapsing into a bloodied, unconscious heap. The remaining syndicate executioners took a collective, terrified step back, their weapons trembling in their hands. They weren't looking at a king anymore. They were looking at a living natural disaster. But Dominic didn't attack them. He didn't have time. Every microsecond that passed was a gallon of blood leaving Elena's heart. He turned his back on the traitors, facing the dark silver blast door. He didn't punch it. He didn't roar. Instead, he reached out, pressing both of his bleeding palms flat against the burning silver-infused metal. He opened his mind, bypassing the local pack link, bypassing the High Council Tower, and tapped directly into the ancient subterranean ley lines of the earth that fed the palace's magical defense matrix. If you can hear me, Dominic projected, his mind tearing through the fabric of the spiritual world, searching for the fading, microscopic sparks of the 12 newborn souls. Do not cross the river. Grab her hand. Anchor her to me. Deep within the sealed chamber, beneath the thick, suffocating cloud of green gas, a miracle of biology and ancient magic occurred. The small white pup, its heart having stopped 3 minutes prior, suddenly twitched. The drop of Elena's blood it had ingested during the rising tension had fused with its synthetic lunar DNA. The pup's chest heaved, its violet eyes snapping open, burning with a fierce, resurrecting fire. A chain reaction tore through the chamber. One by one, the other 11 pups gasped for air, their tiny bodies radiating a brilliant, pulsing wave of violet energy that began to systematically devour the green-silver gas, converting the chemical poison into pure, celestial fuel. Elena's heart, which had given its final agonizing thud, felt the massive combined psychic pull of 12 newborn souls locking onto her life force. And then, through the dark silver door, Dominic's golden sovereign aura slammed into her. The spiritual bond didn't just repair, it exploded. The dark silver blast door did not melt. It literally vaporized into a cloud of fine metallic dust under the sheer concussive pressure of their reunion. The emerald gas vanished, replaced by a roaring cyclone of gold and violet light that lit up the entire subterranean keep like the midday sun. Elena rose from the floor, her long hair whipping around her like a halo of storm clouds, her violet eyes locked onto Dominic's golden ones. The 12 pups swarmed around her feet, their fur shimmering with protective celestial armor. Lady Catherine, groaning as she consciousness returned on the far side of the hall, looked up and let out a breathless, weeping laugh. The prophecy. The twin sovereigns have awakened. Dominic stepped through the dust, his massive hand reaching out to catch Elena as she came down. The moment their skin met, the entire palace shook, a golden-violet shockwave tearing up through the elevator shafts, blowing the roof clean off the High Council Tower miles above them. The traitors who were left standing dropped their weapons, falling to their knees, weeping as the sheer absolute authority of the true king and queen crushed their will to fight. Elena looked up at Dominic, a fierce, beautiful smile cutting through the blood and dirt on her face. They wanted a weapon, my love. Dominic's jaw set, his golden eyes reflecting the absolute ruin of their enemies. Let's go show them how it fires. The sky above the capital city didn't just break. It tore open in a colossal, swirling vortex of gold and violet lightning that mirrored the wrath of the twin sovereigns ascending from the deep. The High Council Tower, once a proud spire of white stone and political arrogance, now stood exposed to the elements, its upper dome completely sheared away by the concussive shockwave of Dominic and Elena's reunited bond. Inside the shattered council chambers, rain mingled with the dust of crushed marble. High Chancellor Raymond Sterling backed away from the edge of the ruined terrace, his hands shaking violently as he tried to punch commands into a broken master console. The guards he had stationed at the doors were gone, either fled into the night or brought to their knees by the sheer, suffocating pressure of the Alpha King's approaching aura. "This is impossible," Raymond muttered, his voice cracking with panic as he looked at the monitors. "The silver gas, the purge protocol, no living wolf can survive that concentration." "We aren't just wolves, Raymond," a voice resonated, cutting through the howling wind. Raymond whipped around, his breath catching in his throat. Emerging from the smoke of the collapsed elevator shaft were Dominic and Elena, walking side by side in perfect, terrifying synchronization. Dominic's radioactive golden eyes burned with the absolute authority of the Fenrir sovereign, his silver-furred arms crossed loosely over a chest that bore the healed scars of 100 battles. Beside him, Elena moved with a lethal, fluid grace that no scholar had ever possessed. Her violet eyes pulsed with ancient celestial power, and a protective, shimmering aura enveloped her body. And right behind them, marching in a silent, predatory phalanx, were the 12 ancient heirs. The pups were no longer blind or uncoordinated. The awakening of their blood bond had accelerated their growth, their young bodies now the size of hunting hounds, their fur glistening with sharp, iridescent armor plates. The smallest white pup walked directly between the king and queen, its violet gaze locked onto Raymond with an unnerving, hyper-intelligent focus. "Traitor," Elena said, her voice carrying a multi-layered harmonic frequency that made the glass panels of the remaining windows shatter into thousands of glittering shards. "You slaughtered thousands in the northern sector. You turned the cradle of our ancestors into a factory for monsters. Your council is over. You think you've won?" Raymond snarled, backed against the edge of the precipice, a desperate, feral courage taking hold of him. He pulled a heavy, silver-plated revolver from his robes, weapons designed specifically by the Syndicate to pierce the skulls of alpha wolves. "The Eclipse Syndicate spans across 5 neighboring kingdoms. Even if you kill me, the network knows what these children are. They will never stop hunting them. You cannot protect 12 gods from a world of hunters." Raymond raised the weapon, pointing it directly at the white pup's head. Before his finger could even begin to tighten around the trigger, the white pup let out a sharp, resonant bark. Instantly, the concept of time within the chamber seemed to warp. The bullet fired from the barrel, but the moment the silver projectile entered the violet aura surrounding the pup, its velocity slowed to an absolute crawl. The bullet hung suspended in midair, spinning uselessly against a wall of pure, localized gravity. With a cold, dismissive gesture of her hand, Elena flipped her palm. The suspended bullet reversed its trajectory, rocketing backward with double the speed, tearing clean through Raymond's right shoulder. The revolver clattered to the stone floor, swallowed by the debris. Raymond screamed, clutching his shattered shoulder as he fell to his knees, his blood staining the pristine white marble. "Mercy!" he gasped, looking up at the towering figure of the Alpha King. "Dominic, I served your father. I helped build this peace." Dominic stepped forward, his heavy leather boot coming down firmly on Raymond's chest, pinning the Chancellor to the floor just as Raymond had pinned his people under tyranny. The king looked down at him, his golden eyes reflecting nothing but absolute, unyielding justice. "My father built a peace on honor, Raymond. You built an empire on graves," Dominic said, his voice a low, final gavel strike. "You wanted to see the power of the ancient weapons? You're looking at them. But they don't belong to you. They belong to the Queen." Dominic looked at Elena, nodding once. Elena stepped up to the edge of the ruined terrace, looking down at the thousands of pack members gathered in the plaza below. Vanguard soldiers, civilian families, and low-ranking wolves who had spent the night in terror. She raised her hand high into the stormy sky. The 12 pups raised their heads simultaneously, letting out a unified, soul-shaking howl that resonated across every mountain and valley in the Leaken realm. As their voices joined, the dark storm clouds above the city instantly broke apart, dissolving into a breathtaking, starlit night sky. A brilliant, shimmering aurora of gold and violet silk stretched across the atmosphere, bathing the entire kingdom in a warm, healing light that washed away the scent of copper and fear. The remaining syndicate rebels throughout the city dropped their weapons, their corrupted red eyes fading back to normal as the celestial wave purged the berserker serum from their bloodlines. The coup was over. Not with a final slaughter, but with an absolute, undeniable demonstration of sovereign authority. Dominic shifted his foot from Raymond's chest, turning the broken chancellor over to a squad of loyalist guards led by a bandaged, but fiercely proud Lady Catherine. "Take him to the deep dungeons," Catherine ordered, her sword drawn. "He will stand trial before the unified clans at dawn." As the guards dragged Raymond away, Dominic walked back to Elena's side, his massive arms sliding around her waist, pulling her close against his chest. The 12 pups gathered around them, nudging their legs and letting out soft, playful yips, their terrifying combat forms melting back into the cute, soft fur of young cubs. Elena rested her head against Dominic's shoulder, her violet eyes softening back into her beautiful, deep hazel. The terrifying power of the sovereigns was resting, but the bond they shared was now an unbreakable, eternal anchor. "We did it, Dominic," she whispered, her hand locking into his burned palm, which was now completely healed, leaving only a faint, silvery line, a badge of honor from the night he fought death itself to keep her alive. Dominic pressed a tender, lingering kiss to her temple. "No, my love. You did it. You kept them alive through the dark. I just came to help you rule the light." The golden rays of the morning sun broke over the peaks of the Black Crag, not with the harsh heat of a summer sky, but with a gentle amber warmth that seemed to breathe fresh life into the wounded kingdom. The spires of the royal palace were already humming with the sound of reconstruction. Thousands of pack members filled the lower courtyards, their voices no longer hushed with fear, but rising in a vibrant chorus of celebration and relief. Inside the grand conservatory of the Eastern Keep, the air smelled of blooming jasmine, fresh pine, and the sweet, rich cream of a victory feast. Sunlight flooded through the floor-to-ceiling arched windows, painting the marble floor in long stripes of brilliant light. "Careful with that one, she's a runner," Elena laughed softly, her voice carrying the rich, melodious warmth of a woman completely at peace. She sat on a thick velvet rug in the center of the conservatory, dressed in a flowing gown of royal emerald and cream silk that elegantly hid the bandages on her shoulders. Nestled in her lap, upside down with its paws waving contentedly in the air, was the small white pup. The young wolf's violet eyes were bright with mischief as it nipped playfully at the golden embroidery of Elena's sleeve. Dominic stood a few paces away, a soft, rare smile gracing his rugged features. He had traded his heavy battlefield armor for a simple tunic of dark leather, his massive frame radiating a calm, protective serenity that only a man who had secured his world could possess. He watched as the other 11 pups tumbled over one another in a chaotic, fluffy pile of paws and tails, chasing a ball of spun yarn across the polished stone floor. "They have an insatiable appetite," Dominic said, walking over and kneeling beside his wife. He offered a small strip of dried venison to a stout brown pup, who snatched it with an eager, high-pitched growl before scurrying back into the safety of the pack. "Genevieve says their metabolism is stabilizing. They won't grow into weapons, Elena. They're just going to be wolves. Powerful ones, but wolves nonetheless." Elena reached out, her fingers tangling with Dominic's as she leaned her head against his solid shoulder. "That is all I ever wanted for them. A choice. A chance to just grow up under a sky that doesn't fear them." The doors of the conservatory clicked open, and Lady Catherine stepped into the room, her expression bright and clear of the exhaustion that had plagued them for days. Behind her walked several high-ranking elders from the northern clans, men and women who had traveled through the night to pledge their allegiance to the twin sovereigns. "Your Majesties," Catherine said, bowing with deep, genuine respect. "The High Council has been fully dissolved. The new governing body is being formed from the scholars and border leaders you selected. Chancellor Raymond and his conspirators have been sentenced to life exile in the frozen wastes beyond the rim. Their names have been struck from our histories." One of the northern elders, a grizzled old wolf with silver hair that matched Dominic's, stepped forward, his eyes shimmering with emotion as he looked at Elena and the 12 pups. "We were told our children were lost to the plague, my queen," the elder whispered, his voice trembling as he dropped to one knee. We did not know the vipers in the capital had stolen them for their laboratories. You risked your life, you endured the wilderness, and you became a mother to the motherless. The northern packs will never forget your sacrifice. Our loyalty belongs to you, not by law but by blood and heart. Elena stood up, handing the white pup to Dominic, who caught the little creature with surprising gentleness in his massive arms. She walked over to the elder, reaching down to take his weathered hands, lifting him back to his feet. "They are not just my children or your children anymore," Elena said, her hazel eyes holding a deep, timeless wisdom. "They are the children of the entire realm. Let them be a reminder that our strength does not come from the weapons we build in the dark, but from the lives we protect in the light." A roar of approval and applause echoed from the corridor outside as the elder bowed his head in deep gratitude. As the sun reached its noon crest, Dominic walked up behind Elena, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. The 12 pups swarmed around their feet, letting out a unified, happy chorus of yips and barks that filled the vast stone room with life. The spiritual bond between the king and queen was no longer a thin, fragile thread. It was a massive golden-violet river of light that flowed through their souls, anchoring them to each other, to their people, and to the 12 beautiful lives they had rescued from the freezing dark. They had survived the storm, they had unmasked the vipers, and together, they had ushered in a new era of peace that would echo through the generations. What an incredible, emotional journey this has been, my beautiful pack. To see our Alpha King and Luna Queen stand victorious alongside the 12 heirs is a testament to the power of love, courage, and true loyalty. I want to hear from every single one of you. What was your absolute favorite moment of this epic story? Drop a comment below. Let me know where you watched from, and if you haven't yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our incredible family so you never miss our next adventure. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and keep your bond unbroken.